Welcome to this explainer, everyone. Today, we're unpacking a concept that literally flips how we look at professional problem solving. We're talking about the idea that consulting is actually a mindset. It's not just some fancy job title printed on a business card.
Right. It's a completely different way of thinking. And honestly, when you adopt it, it generates just an incredible amount of clarity. It leads to way better decisions for any professional, no matter what industry you're in. You absolutely do not need to work for some massive firm to start thinking like a consultant.
So it begs the question, right? Is consulting a profession or is it a mindset?
Well, as we're going to see today, it is definitively a mindset. When you start thinking this way, it totally elevates entrepreneurs, managers, and really just everyday leaders. You go from being a simple problem solver to a highly strategic thinker.
Exactly. You basically stop just running around putting out fires and you start designing fireproof systems.
All right, let's jump right into part one, diagnosing the real problem, or how to find the actual root cause. To see this in action, imagine a massive manufacturing factory that's literally on the brink of shutting down. The management team was completely convinced they had a huge productivity issue.
Yeah, but that was just their perceived problem. They were reacting totally to the symptoms. Then a consultant comes in, walks the floor, observes, and discovers the actual root cause. And you know what it was?
Poor communication between departments.
Crazy, right? They weren't actually inefficient at all. They were just incredibly disconnected from each other. Once they bridged that communication gap, boom, they completely restored their profitability.
And that perfectly sets up our first major takeaway. See what others miss. A great consultant acts a lot like a really skilled medical doctor.
I love that analogy. You know, a patient comes in complaining of a terrible headache, but a good doctor investigates the deeper underlying issues instead of just handing them a bottle of painkillers and sending them home.
Exactly. The consulting mindset demands that you look right past those obvious visible symptoms to create genuine long-term solutions. Which leads us nicely into part two, the power of questions, and how we actually go about uncovering the truth. So there's this classic story of a young entrepreneur who is just absolutely desperate for funding. He goes to a mentor, totally convinced that all he needs is a quick injection of capital to survive.
Right, but the mentor doesn't just pull out a checkbook. Instead, they start asking these persistent, really probing questions. And through that, they realize the real issue was actually customer retention. The business was churning through customers faster than it could acquire them.
So what he actually needed were retention strategies, not just more cash to burn through. By asking better questions, they literally uncovered a completely different and honestly far better solution. The crucial point to remember here is that your insights are only ever going to be as good as your questions. Great consultants always move way beyond those surface-level requests.
They really do. They dig into motivations, they identify hidden barriers, and they spot opportunities that just aren't immediately obvious to everyone else in the room.
If you want to get to the truth of any situation in your own career, you absolutely have to master the art of asking questions that challenge people's initial assumptions.
Let's move on to part three, the currency of consulting, which is really all about building trust early on. This brings to mind a wildly successful consultant whose whole strategy was fascinating. He practically never pitched his services directly. Instead, his entire game plan was to build trust long before he ever actually needed it.
Which honestly sounds a bit counterintuitive, right? But he just gave away knowledge. He ran free workshops, he published articles, hosted webinars, and prioritized having real, meaningful conversations with people.
Exactly. By consistently putting out massive value and educational content into the world, he built rock-solid credibility. He ended up attracting clients totally naturally because trust is the absolute foundation of this entire mindset. That perfectly sets up the tale of two very different consultants. First, think about consultant A. They do good work, they finish the project, hand over the invoice, and then essentially vanish into the night. It's purely transactional. But then you have consultant B. They actually stay connected. They continue sharing new ideas over time, and they actively support their clients long after the official contract is wrapped up. Which brings us to this really profound truth. Relationships create wealth. I totally agree with that. The massive fundamental difference between consultant A and consultant B is understanding that real business growth doesn't come from a string of cold, one-off transactions. It comes from nurturing every single client interaction into a genuine long-term partnership.
Absolutely. When you continuously support people, that's what actually yields strong referrals and genuine wealth, both financially and professionally.
Of course, to actually maintain those valuable relationships, you can't afford to be stagnant. Which brings us to part four,
the ultimate goal, and the absolute necessity of lifelong learning.
When you break down exactly where a consulting mindset focuses its curiosity, you see some clear patterns. To stay adaptable and relevant in a world that is shifting constantly, you have to be fully committed to continuous learning, specifically in core, high-impact areas like leadership, technology, AI, and business strategy. You literally have to constantly be feeding your brain. Right, so that when a client or a colleague inevitably comes to you with a complex problem, you actually have fresh, highly relevant insights ready to go.
And when you start combining all of these elements together, asking the right questions, building deep trust, and committing to continuous learning, you naturally evolve.
You start out as a standard service provider. Then, over time, you level up to become a long-term partner.
But the ultimate goal? That's becoming the trusted advisor. That is the highest possible level, where your perspective is actively sought out by leaders before major decisions are even made.
So, what's the ultimate takeaway here? Mastering this mindset means you are able to see opportunities and solutions where everyone else is just staring blankly at confusion and obstacles. You become the person in the room who brings absolute clarity out of total chaos. Remember, great consultants don't just hand over easy answers, they create lasting clarity.
So, we want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Who will seek your perspective next? Really think about the people in your network right now. How can you take this framework, diagnosing the real root problems, asking much better questions, and building trust early to become that absolutely indispensable, trusted advisor in your own career? The mindset is entirely yours to claim. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and we will see you next time.
See you then.